Ixu choked in fear and amazement at the black, hellish smoke that hung over the once great city of Eldrax. It permeated buildings and streets, seeding the puddles created by destroyed pipes and obsidian black. Even through his gas mask, the air tasted thick and acrid, starkly different from the floral and tropical air of Ixu's jungle homeworld of Tshirt. Tshirt, like free apes of the entire world, was the colonial subject of the great empire of Eldrax. Ixu squinted through the dirty lenses of his mask, trying to make out the elegant malls and avenues he had seen in the postcards and pictures of Master Exor. Like many other Eldraxi, Master Exor had been a colonial official of the Empire, with an emphasis on had. Like their desolate capital, the Empire of Eldraxi, where the moon never sets, the greatest power to ever exist on the planet of Goxis, was a pale husk of its former self. It had all started when the others descended from the stars. They had landed in the northernmost part of the Eldraxi home islands in great silver saucers, a lot like the plates Ixu used to serve Master Exor's food on. From these plates had spilled forth five-legged, pentapie-like walking machines that spewed fiery death from shielded portholes. Ixu had seen one before, destroyed, thankfully, its chrome-framed pockmarked with holes from the heavy artillery of an entire regiment. It looked a lot like the Pishtu from home, a small, vibrantly coloured, five-legged molluscoid that tasted sublime when grilled. Why was he thinking so much about food? A low rumble from both of Ixu's stomachs quickly confirmed his hypothesis. He was hungry. Their regiment, the newly raised Emperor's 122nd Territorial Tshirt Foot, had been marching for days on end with barely any rest or respite. They had been ordered forward by the Crown Princess, acting in place of the catatonic Emperor, as part of a desperate counteroffensive to retake the ruins of Eldrax. The city really held no more strategic or industrial value of any kind, but it was an important symbol, a display designed to give hope to a world quickly losing it in the face of the seemingly unstoppable others. Even Ixu, despite his position as a lowly badman, understood the value of symbols. After all, Colonel Exor still insisted on wearing his colonial sash and sabre. Ixu could barely hold back tears at the sight of it. The once royal blue of the sash was now barely visible under the thick film of grime that covered it. Colonel Exor had always complimented him on how well Ixu laundered his sash, and now he would have to completely replace it. After a little more marching, the regiment came to a halt in front of what Colonel Exor called the Grand Theatre of Eldrax. The regiment quickly moved inside, where the air was clean enough to allow the men to take off their masks. As Ixu gnawed on his issued hardtack and choked on the putrid mass of rotten flesh the Eldraxi insisted was canned beef, he stole a glance at Colonel Exor. He had barely touched the rations Ixu had prepared for him. Instead, he seemed to wander aimlessly around the auditorium. A look of longing and deep sadness flashed across his eyes as he ran a finger over a dull painting. A thin film of oil and grime came off, revealing a small portion of a vibrant mural. Ixu had heard Colonel Exor recount the great performances that he saw at this very theatre after his biannual trips back to Eldrax. Closing his eyes, Ixu tried to envision what the theatre must have looked like before the war. Cheering crowds, lavish costumes, great ensembles of talented musicians. Now, empty seats, abandoned outfits, the bones of men, women, and children. Suddenly, Ixu felt his last piece of hardtack snatched from his hands. His eyes flew open, searching for the perpetrator, as his comrades laughed heartily at the theft. A young male, practically a child compared to Ixu, was half laughing, half choking, as he scarfed down the last piece of Ixu's hardtack. Maybe because he felt the hallowed nature of the theatre, a mass grave for hundreds of innocents. Maybe because he feared for his mate and younglings back in Tshirt. Maybe because he feared facing the invisible others, but certainly for a reason that he could not vocalize right then. Ixu dove at the offender, in a flurry of fists and insults. Everyone froze in surprise for a split second, before cries and intervening hands pulled Ixu away from the young male. Ixu felt a sense of smug satisfaction for a second, as he observed the younger male's rapidly swelling eye. This satisfaction was rapidly replaced by shame, as Colonel Exor strode over and began to harshly admonish Iksu. "Really, Iksu? I expect better of you," Colonel Exor disappointedly remarked, as he examined the other male's injury. "Sorry, sir," Iksu replied, somewhat sheepishly, his signifier tendrils on the back of his mane turning bright yellow in embarrassment. "Just look at what you've done to young Ixalu. The poor lad's barely going to be able to put on his mask." Before Colonel Exor could continue, a massive silver leg came crashing through the roof of the theatre. The dispute was quickly forgotten, as the Teshikan infantry immediately dove for their rifles, like they were drilled, and began shooting at the leg. Colonel Exor immediately drew his saber and revolver, and began shouting orders. "Concentrate your fire in the joints, boys! Spread out! Spread out!" No sooner had the colonel screamed the last order, than a bright purple beam carved a horrific swath through a company near the stage. Thankfully, most managed to disperse in time, dodging the deadly destruction wrought by the other's beam. But a chunk of the company, some 40 or so men, had not been so fast or so lucky. Their mangled corpses lay where they fell. But the beam was not the worst of it. Soon the black smoke began to pour in from outside. Men scrambled for their masks as the fog fell upon them. Those who had practiced enough lived. Those who didn't died, writhing in silent agony as the smoke solidified in their lungs, literally turning the organs to stone. Colonel Exor had left his mask with his rations, far away from Iksu's little cluster, too far. Iksu quickly reacted, pulling his mask from its bag and jamming it into Colonel Exor's chest. Before the man could protest, Iksu quickly silenced him with a, "I'll manage, sir. You must live and see Madame Exora again." Reluctantly, Colonel Exor donned the mask, while Iksu quickly helped young Ixalu don his, their fight long forgotten. Having done his duties, Iksu began to rapidly fire at the joint of the other's walker, cursing them, their mothers, their fathers, and their damned ancestors every time he rapped back the bolt of his rifle. The fury of a man who had consigned himself to death. The world became just him, the sights of his rifle, and the leg of the hideous machines that were bringing doom to his world. As the black closed in, Iksu relented for one brief second, thinking about his mate, Ixa, and his younglings. He silently prayed that Teshikan, half a world away, and shielded by the remnants of the Eldraxi High Ocean's fleet, would be safe from the others. In his heart of hearts, facing the now invincible enemy, he knew it was a forlorn hope. Suddenly, an impact to his chest jolted him from his thoughts. It was Colonel Exor slamming a mask, his mask, as denoted by the decorative gold inlays, into Iksu's chest. The colonel had braved the gauntlet of beams that ravaged that portion of the theatre to retrieve his mask and give it to Iksu. "Quick, man! Put it on before the smoke is upon us!" came Colonel Exor's muffled yell. Iksu quickly donned the mask with practiced motions and joined the remnants of the regiment that Colonel Exor was leading in a retreat from the theatre. The Emperor's 122nd Territorial Teshikan Foot, all 3 companies that remained of the original 16, spilled out into the rubble-strewn square in front of the Grand Theatre of Eldrax. There, they bore witness to a horrific sight. 6 other walkers surrounded the Grand Theatre, encircling the poor unit. With steel in his voice, Colonel Exor loudly commanded, "Regiment, form circle!" The remaining men, Iksu included, quietly and calmly formed a circle, rifles pointed outward, menacing the invaders, daring them to approach. Next to Iksu, Ixilu produced his bayonet and affixed it to the end of his rifle. For some reason, the hopeless action inspired Iksu to do the same. Soon, the entire regiment had fixed bayonets. The others waited for an almost imperceptible second longer than they should have. Maybe they were too busy laughing at the tiny little unit, putting little triangles of steel on top of their little wooden rods that spat little lead bullets that did nothing to their walkers. Maybe they were admiring the bravery of these forlorn defenders, destined to die against an enemy they could never prevail against. Regardless of the reason, one of the walkers stepped forwards, seemingly claiming the right to annihilate Iksu and his brothers out of some vestige of tribal tradition the others had preserved. A purple beam slashed through the half of the circle. It passed right by Iksu, coming so close that he could feel his hairs being singed to a crisp. Next to him where Ixalu had knelt. Nothing but black glass remained. "Up and at him, boys! Give him steel!" At once, Ixu's fear and hesitation was washed away, as Colonel Exor's commanding voice drove him into action. Ixu charged forward, firing his rifle wildly, futilely. "For Eldrax and the Emperor!" Once more, Colonel Exor's cries drove his men forward. Out of the corner of his eyes, almost concealed by the edge of Colonel Exor's mask, Ixu could see Colonel Exor sprinting forward at the head of the charge, saber drawn, continuously squeezing the trigger of his empty revolver. From his lips, Ixu felt his own battle cry emerge. A guttural string of syllables and tones banned by the Empire of Eldrax upon the pain of death. "Taxpeer! Witness me!" To Ixu's surprise, his cry was matched by some 200 voices. Together, they cried out in a last act of defiance, cursing the alien invasion that had pulled them so far away from home, and pulled their race to the brink. Almost contemptuously, the walker let loose his beams. A deathly pitter of purple filled Ixu's vision. He squeezed his eyes shut, awaiting nothingness, but it was not to come. Instead, a bright blue screen, a dome, surrounded the devastated remains of the 122nd. Black angels soared down from the heavens. They would have been invisible against the blackened sky of Goxis, if not for the fact they punched holes of sunlight through the thick smog. Silhouetted in halos of sunlight, the angels soared down. Ixu nearly fell to his knees and prayed. Indeed, some of his more religious brethren did just that. Instead, Ixu watched in amazement as the black angels fell upon the others. With blades and blasts of blue light, like the same that surrounded them, they felled walkers left and right. As Ixu traced the descent of the angels downwards, he soon realized one of the creatures stood in front of his unit, shielding them from the others. As he squinted through Colonel Exor's mask, Ixu realized with a shock that these avenging angels were made of metal, just like the others. A pang of fear stabbed at his chest. However, a mixture of reason and hope soon overrode his fears. These new others were clearly the enemy of the others. The new other in front of them had effortlessly brushed aside these seemingly invincible walkers with a burst of weapons fire from his back and a single slash of his great sword. Ixu could not help but marvel at the new other. It stood some 15 meters tall, nearly greater by half than the walkers of the others. Like Ixu, it stood on 2 legs with 2 arms, something that gave him great comfort compared to the alien forms of the others. As Ixu and other members of the 122nd stood, marveling at the incredible power of the new other, now standing guard over them, his comrades quickly persecuted a one-sided battle against the others. In mere minutes, the entire area around them had been cleared of the others and their spindly walkers, leaving the 122nd alone with their new guardian. Seeing the battle was over, Ixu looked towards Colonel Exor for direction. For the first time, even the Eldraxi officer looked lost. He was simply staring up at the new other, with the same awe that Ixu was. After a brief period of inactivity, the new other suddenly began to move again. It deftly knelt down, bringing its hand up to its chest, which duly split open, to reveal a small, goxinoid-like figure. Like its machine, the figure was armoured in night black. Like Colonel Exor, the figure seemed to carry some kind of saber at his hip. Now on the ground, the figure approached Ixu and the 122nd, with his hands raised, indicating it carried no ill intent. It passed through the blue dome that still surrounded the 122nd, without a moment's hesitation. Seeing this, one of the privates gave the dome a solid tap, only to find it was, well, solid. Underneath Colonel Exu's mask, Ixu could feel his signifier tendrils rapidly shift colours. First surprise, the briefest period of arousal, and then a hefty amount of embarrassment. The scrumming around him confirmed that his comrades had just experienced the same sequence of emotions. The form-fitting armour of the new other prominently protruded in the shape of Goxixian memories around the chest area. This was far above the stomach, where Goxixian females had their memories, but for soldiers who had been months away from women, and from a conservative society no less, the display had an unsurprising result. The new other stopped a respectful distance from the huddled remnants of the 122nd, hands still raised. In perfect Eldraxian, the new other began to speak. her, presumably, voice somehow amplified. I am Captain Chantal Liu, Knight Commander of the Order of the Obsidian Komodo, 1st Expeditionary Fleet, Knights of Sol. By the power vested in me by the Solar Accords and the New Geneva Convention, I hereby offer your world the protection of the Federation of Sol. Captain Chantal Liu extended her hand, palm up, to Ixu, to the 122nd, to all of Goxix. Do you accept?